It's my great pleasure to introduce Henry Curtis. He's been working with Life of the Land for almost 20 years to develop Pono energy policies in Hawaii. So please give a warm welcome to Henry Curtis. He came here all the way from Hawaii.
Aloha. I think you found one of the secrets, bringing young people on. I'm fortunate to have just come on after the circus, but I think involving young people is really, really important. So thank you. I've always been very active in injustice issues. Life of the Land was an organization founded in 1970. One of our early actions was to sue the Navy for bombing Pahoa in '71. We also sued PICO on their rate hike in 1971 and won it before the Supreme Court in '75. They had asked the Public Utilities Commission to have ratepayers pay for an ad campaign to ask ratepayers to consume more electricity. The PUC had agreed, and the Supreme Court said no. I came to the organization in '94, principally, and got involved in a lot of military cleanup work. But in around '96, two local groups approached me and said, "We have this transmission line fight. Can you help us out with it?" And so I've been involved with energy since '96. That was a fight on Bahila Ridge on Oahu. I don't know. This would be better, I think. That was a fight that Hawaiian Electric waged against the community for 30 years. And there was an enormous community uprising that stopped it in the '70s. So PICO just waited out a few years and came back with it in the '90s. Sort of like geothermal. It pops up, disappears, and now it's popping up again. The original plan, industrialization of Puna. One of the tactics we used on the power line fight is to figure out how many different groups we could get to unite with us. How many different businesses, churches, community associations, neighborhood boards, different kinds of organizations, both within the area and in other parts of the state, would join together and say no. Because what agencies really listen to are people and organizations. They get nervous when they see a lot of people getting together, and they get nervous when they see a lot of organizations pushing a certain agenda. It is then that politicians often jump on board and say they were always there in the first place. So after the fight over the transmission line, I got involved first at the legislature and then moved to the Public Utilities Commission. The Public Utilities Commission is a really, really strange animal because very few people understand it, including lawyers and engineers. And I've represented Life of the Land in 30-odd contested case proceedings. I'm happy to see Puna Pono jump into their first PUC issue. Puna Pono has just intervened in the Integrated Resource Planning docket before the PUC. And I want to talk a little bit about that. One person asked here, why do we have shouldn't all the information be public? And for whatever reason, it isn't. But when you enter a docket before the Public Utilities Commission, you have to sign a statement saying you can't disclose certain information, but everything is made available to those who do intervene. So you can influence the outcome of an event at the Public Utilities Commission. You also get the right to ask other parties questions that they have to give answers to. You also get to go before an evidentiary hearing where you can put on your witnesses and explain your case, and you can cross-examine their witnesses and their case. It was under cross-examination of 12 witnesses in 2006 that I asked them about climate change, asked HICO about climate change. And some of the early witnesses said, you know, aren't there two sides to that issue? And others said, you know, it's just not my Kuleana. And each of the witnesses were watching the PUC and their staff, and they were like shaking their heads and saying, can you believe these morons? And the 12th HICO witness, a vice president, got up and said, okay, it's real. We're part of the problem. We're part of the solution. So you can have an impact before the Public Utilities Commission. Now, you have two opportunities. The first is what's called integrated resource planning, where the HICO, MECO, and HELCO have spent $6 million over the last year developing scenarios of what the future might look like, and their 5-year action plan. And this plan was just submitted to the PUC on June 28th, and it got sort of universal rejection by a lot of people. Mainstream people found it objectionable. For example, one thing that we've heard a lot is that people want to put solar on their roofs. And you might consider solar energy on roofs to be a resource that could meet the load. Because if you need new generation, just count up how many roofs you need and how much solar you need and encourage people to put it on. Well, Hawai'i Electric said, no, we won't look at that issue. Another issue that I was really surprised for the last several years, we've heard about smart grids, how the utility wants to put computer nodes everywhere and telecommunication nodes everywhere and know the minute changes in every intersection of their grid. And so the Public Utilities Commission asked them for a cost-benefit analysis in this plan, and they said, no. So the plan is meeting a lot of skepticism, and that's really good, because now until mid part of next week, groups can intervene in the docket, become parties in the docket, and ask questions and get answers from the utility. It's great to be able to approach the utility and say, I have a question. It's really interesting to put it in writing and get their response in writing and be able to show people this is what they have in writing. The second issue is the geothermal RFP. During the RFP process, you're not allowed to know who is bidding on the contracts. You're not allowed to know who HELCO is selected as the winner until the winner is chosen. You don't know what the costs are. You don't know where the other geographical locations are. But after HELCO signs a contract with a geothermal producer, they have to bring the contract to the Public Utilities Commission for approval. At that point, different parties can intervene in the docket. Interveners have to sign a non-disclosure agreement, so certain documents are confidential, but the interveners will know who bid, they'll be able to see the other bids, they'll be able to see the costs, they'll be able to see the locations, and they can organize people around the issues involved. So the integrated resource planning and the geothermal dockets before the PUC are really key. They're really powerful. Now, the utilities fear solar for a reason. The last 6 years, HICO, MECO, and HELCO have had a drop in demand each year. How do you think a drop in demand matches the need for new generation? The new generation is needed only under one condition. They can drive up the demand by getting new businesses here and by limiting people having the right to have solar. This issue is scaring utilities across the nation. The New York Times had an article yesterday that said that utilities across the nation have suddenly realized they have a problem with solar. The problem is that while solar is still only about 1% of all the energy produced in the country, around the world in the last 10 years, the growth rate per year worldwide for the last 10 years, the growth rate is 44% a year. It has grown 37-fold in 10 years. So the utilities see the writing on the wall. And in fact, Hawaiian Electric, in filing a document with the Securities and Exchange Commission last year, said our business might be obsolete and we might go out of business. So the best way of fighting the geothermal is to find more and more people who don't need to be attached to the grid. And there are actually two great mechanisms. First, right now, there are companies that are willing to come in and supply all of the upfront cost and to sign 20-year contracts with people, levelized costs for solar on rooftops. I know on Oahu, I know of a couple that got it at 23 cents a kilowatt hour. So they have a set amount of load at 23 cents a kilowatt hour for the next 20 years. They only buy from the utility what they need above that. Second, starting in January this year, next year, 2014, there will be a mechanism on your utility bill where you can put in solar on your roof and decrease your energy bill and pay it off by paying lower for your electricity. You both get a lower rate and part of your rate goes to pay for the rooftop system. So it will further drive down demand. But the method that we're approaching is, why not just cut the ties to the grid in the first place? Because the cost of electricity in states across the nation range from 8 cents to 19 cents a kilowatt hour. And since our rates are more than double that, it is now cost effective to put in solar and a battery. And you save money by disconnecting from the grid. So these are the arguments that we're going to be raising before the Public Utilities Commission in the Integrated Resource Planning docket. We also filed a motion to intervene in the cable docket. The PUC has opened up the docket to look at the inter-island cable from Oahu to Maui. Now, there are many reasons to oppose a cable, but the particular issue that we're jumping in on is the cable is proposed to go through the Hawaii Humpback Whale Sanctuary between Molokai and Lanai. And while electromagnetic fields may or may not impact people, and there's a lot of speculation both ways, federal agencies have asserted that there is no lack of data on marine species, that whales and sharks and eels and dolphins and some fish, EMF affects their navigation, communication, detection of prey, and search for food. And that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric, NOAA, whatever, I get that always wrong. NOAA has said that they have major concerns, both short-term impacts and long-term impacts. And U.S. Fish and Wildlife has said you should use the precautionary principle. So in other words, if there's another alternative, why not look at it? And rooftop solar does not have the same impacts. So we think we can get to really probe DBED and find out why they have been so hostile to alternatives. Why, for example, when the U.S. Department of Energy has pointed out that Oahu has all the solar it needs to supply its own power. We have plenty of wind. We have biomass. Why do we need the cable? The only reason we need the cable is if you wanted to take 6 different grids that we have now where you can test different ideas on 6 different grids and merge them into one grid so you have less to test it. Makes no sense unless you're a developer who has a lot of money. We know one group that wants to build the cable is Next Era, NEXTERA. They have $64 billion in assets, owns Florida Power and Light, and would like to come here and build our cable for us and leave. We think they should leave before they build the cable. I've also been asked by some people, what about microgrids? Why can't we just string together communities and that way share power within communities, but do away with the big grid? That issue right now is complicated because if you put a line across a tax map key or across a road, you become a public utility. And so we just need to change the law with that. Perhaps our senator, we can help get legislation through that would allow micro utilities to exist in small communities. I really want to open it up for Q&A because I think that's where I think you probably have a lot of questions, right? No?
Yeah, Bill. Oh, okay. So if you come up here, if you have any questions for Henry?
Say something, Henry.
I mean, I can continue, but I mean, if there are questions, by all means ask them.
I'm interested in community-owned utilities so that any profits and the control of our utilities stay within the community. So that's where I'm at. And I know Sonoma and Marin County have done so. And I understand that Marin County will come and mentor for free. So they don't have the perfect setup up there. But I really like the idea of the community having control and then having those profits come back and benefit the community. So thank you.
One of the major fights going across the country right now, this month, is Boulder, Colorado. Boulder has proposed to municipalize the privately owned utility in their city and has threatened to condemn land to get their utility. The company, the utility, is fighting it because it's the same utility that operates in Minneapolis, and Minneapolis has started saying if Boulder can do it, why can't we? In addition, the University of California, San Diego has a peak load of 42 megawatts. So it's maybe a third of this grid. And in September 2011, all of Southern California, parts of Arizona, and northern Mexico went black, and UCSD and La Jolla stayed lit. And the person who oversees that program has been brought in by Larry Felsen to work on Lanai, to bring about self-sufficiency on Lanai. So there are models out there, and there are opportunities here to test them. I know both Molokai and Maui are looking at co-ops or municipal utilities. The issue really would be what price the utility would sell it for. And one of the things that would help drive down the price is if people left the grid, therefore making it more and more desirable for them to get out. The downside of it is, you may have heard that Connie Lau, the chair of Hawai'i Electric Industries, took no pay raise last year because we were all suffering. So she maintained her current salary of $100,000 a week. And in the event that somebody takes over the utility, we have to pay her $28 million.
Golden parachute.
Hey, Henry, can you explain the microgrid at US San Diego?
I should phrase, when we talk about microgrids, there's one term, but there are three different concepts, and they're all called microgrids. Some people think a microgrid is simply a small grid. So if Oahu has a big grid, Lanai has a microgrid. A second definition is someplace you test ideas. So for example, Nelha is testing different kinds of distributed generation on their circuit. And therefore some people say that Nelha has a microgrid, even though it's connected to the Helco grid. The third definition of microgrid is a section of the grid that you can cut from the main grid. So if the main grid goes dark, you can keep your island lit. So 3 different definitions. I use it in the sense that what you do is you're able to have your microgrid lit when the big grid goes down. So you basically break away but remain attached until you feel comfortable with your microgrid, and then when you're comfortable, you cut the cord.
So they produce their own power at the university?
Yeah, UCSD operated on solar and gas. So their major generator was gas, but they had, I think now 10 megawatts in solar.
Yeah, my question is, what is really the point of the cable other than profit for the company who builds it? Who is it going to benefit really?
It benefits, I guess, 2 sets of people. One, it benefits whoever builds it. Because if you have to put in $1 billion infrastructure, or $2 billion, or $3 billion, there's a lot of money available to pay politicians. So, for example, the past 2 years, Next Era, which is this company that wants to put in the cable, for the past 2 years, they've paid a law firm that happens to be the same law firm as Blue Planet Foundation. And their lawyer has been lobbying the legislature to get favorable legislation for the cable. The second group that will benefit is the Big Island, those people who think they can build massive amounts of geothermal here. Capitalists who may feel they can come to Hawaii, make a quick buck and leave, and if they take a nice rural community and industrialize it, as long as it makes a profit, everything is fine. So those are the 2 groups, and the thing, money works to a certain extent, but when you have enough people organized, politicians turn away from the money and they turn towards the people.
Could you come up here with your question?
What do you think of the model that Kauai has as a nonprofit utility? And do you think it might be applicable to this island? And if so, how do we get there from here?
Kauai Island Utility Co-op came about 10 years ago, buying out Citizens Utility of Stamford, Connecticut. They borrowed the entire amount of money from the feds, from the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association and from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So they needed to lay out no money. And gradually they've been able to use the rates they collect from the ratepayers to build up collateral for themselves and to give out payments to their customers who are also their owners. It took them several years to get comfortable with themselves. The KIUC board has always been dominated by business. It's never had a large community presence. So it's like trading one owner who's far away to an owner who is closer, but unless you're in the business community and the larger business community, not the mom and pop businesses, it's not a direct control. Part of the issue is that on KIUC, only 20% of the membership ever votes. Out of 27,000 members, it takes 3,000 to get elected to the board. The community people who have run have generally gotten the 2,000, 2,500, occasionally 3,000 numbers. But large part, most people just don't get involved. And the Public Utilities Commission figures that co-ops, because they're owned by the people who are getting the electricity, have a lot less oversight. So if you find a local group that you feel can be trusted to run it, that is great. It's not necessarily the route to go.
Henry, there's a rumor now with this RFP that Helco is going to decide in early September, but they're not going to even release those results for like 210 days. No one is going to know. And so you mentioned the fact that if you can intervene at the PUC, we're going to find out who these people are that have been rewarded the contract. Am I correct in that?
After they wait the 210 days, the 9 months or whatever, they'll publicly announce the name of the winner, but they will not identify the losers. At that point, they'll bring the contract to the PUC, and an intervener such as Punapono can intervene, and whoever intervened would have to sign a confidentiality agreement. They would be able to see the full contracts of those who did not get it. They would not be able to share the names with the general community, but if you have faith in whatever groups intervene, and if you put the right people there and trust them to analyze it, they will be able to influence whether the PUC accepts or rejects the contract.
So it'll still be, no one's going to know who got the contract.
No, they'll know who got the contract. They won't know who did not get the contract.
Okay, well, it's kind of more important we know who did get it.
What Helco will only announce is that they've reached a power purchase agreement with a company, and it will be a draft agreement because it must be submitted to the PUC. Anything that the utility does that costs more than $2.5 million, they cannot do without PUC approval. And in fact, recently, the gas company went to the PUC and said, we spent this money and we forgot to ask you for permission to spend it. We'd like to now have you approve it in hindsight. And the PUC said, you will eat that.
Question on that same vein, sir. So it seems to me there would be a benefit in knowing detail for me, the benefit in knowing the companies that did not win. Would the people who you say we should entrust into that information for us and process it for us, would they be able to then recommend that another one of the losers be picked instead, and then the PUC could pass that?
If the proposal that would be brought before the PUC, let's say it's Helco and Company A, the PUC could either accept, modify, or reject that. If they reject it, then Helco could come back with a proposal to accept Company B. But the proposal, what the PUC would be reviewing is whether the proposed contract that the utility submitted made sense, whether it was reasonable and in the public interest. And it is then that community groups can intervene and you get to really see a whole bunch of documents that are not very public, and to probe not only what's in the documents, but why people did it the way they did it, because you'd be able to cross-examine them. And most of the evidentiary hearings are public. There are public documents. So I'm not a lawyer. I've represented Lifeline in 31 contested case proceedings. I'm not an engineer. The PUC appointed me to their reliability standards working group and the minimum load and curtailment subgroup. And I'm not a resource optimization kind of person. but the PUC appointed me to review HECO's use of Strategist, which is a program designed to figure out from a wide selection of alternatives which one should win and which one should lose. And HECO reluctantly gave me a tenth of a terabyte of data, which is, I needed a new program just to be able to open the files.
So how do we use it for interest?
Getting a large number of people active locally and getting a large demonstration at the Helco building shows that you have clout. Getting a large number of different organizations and associations and groups behind you shows that you have not only individuals, but many different entities that support what you're doing. That gives you greater access to the PUC. The PUC can accept or can reject you, but the more clout you have and the more expertise you have, the better it is. Because the PUC, in letting groups into dockets, wants to know, one, do they have some kind of issue they're protecting? You clearly have geothermal you're protecting. Do you have expertise in the field? You clearly have expertise. Can you help influence their outcome? It's not enough to just have an interest, but you must be able to educate the commissioners and help them influence their outcome. And that comes, I'm sure you can do that, but it's just the way they operate.
The general body, how many is that? And specifically in groups, how many is that?
In Vahila Ridge, we had, must have been 50 organizations line up. We had businesses, we had churches, we had all sorts of organizations, because I think every one of you belongs to some organization outside of this organization. It could be a civic club, it could be anything. But the more different groups and the more you raise it in different venues and get different groups to support the fight against geothermal, it shows broader support. And that's what the powers that be really want to see.
For the demographic here, is that 500 people in front of Helco and housing? What is it?
There's no magic number.
Here's a question here.
Now, during the daytime, most of the base load of the power is going towards businesses. And it seems like to me right now, you know, those businesses, if they were really thinking they'd be going solar already, especially if they have a flat roof, you know. So is there anything legislatively or whatever that could be done to push them over the edge, like, you know, HBM or any of those businesses, just to be thinking more in terms of, you know, let's just make it happen instead of keep paying these high rates?
One of the problems that we have in Hawaii is that our peak energy use, the time we use the most energy on the grid, occurs between 5 and 8 p.m. between October and December. Typically a time when the sun is set and winds are died down. So that if you rely only on solar, every single Helco generator still has to exist, because they all have to exist for that peak period. The way of really impacting the utility is to go after that peak load. There are a few ways of doing it. One, instead of doing your wash in the evening, do it in the morning. Two, use efficient light bulbs and other things that decrease the amount of energy you're draining from the grid. Three, turn off devices instead of leaving them on the off position, because devices on the off position suck out almost as much energy as when they're on. And getting batteries in the home to actually cut the ties to the grid, because what you really want to do is find ways of lowering that peak energy use that occurs in the fall and early winter in the evening. Cutting that has the greatest hit to the utility.
Okay, this will have to be the last question because we're running behind.
My question is the planet we live on, this entity, this organism, this living being, considered an entity by these organizations and leaders?
Actually, it's surprising because in the integrated resource planning process, Hawaiian Electric lists a number of objectives on what they hope to accomplish with the plan. And the number one is protect the local culture, and the number two is protect the environment. And with the exception of air emissions, those two principles are mentioned nowhere in the entire rest of the document. And Hawaiian Electric was faulted by a person selected by the Public Utilities Commission to review the document. In the submarine cable docket, the PUC, in opening the docket, said, we want to look at not just the financial cost, but the environmental and cultural impacts also. So HECO is scared of thinking of the planet as alive, scared of thinking of the culture and environment are important. But the Public Utilities Commission knows they have to address those issues. And sort of a funny related issue, the gas company a few months ago opened up a docket to suggest they wanted natural gas imported into this state. 3 groups, including Lifeline, intervened in the docket, saying that we were very concerned about fracking. Hawaiian Electric jumped in and said, if you let these groups in, we want to be in. And I wrote a motion to ask the PUC to reject the HECO motion to intervene on the grounds that you have to intervene to advise the commission, not to attack another group. The gas company saw all that and quickly closed the docket. So the PUC is aware of it, and there are groups that will raise the issue. The utility is afraid of it, but that's fine.
Okay, that's all the time we have. If you have more questions for Henry, you can ask him after the meeting.